Hello, everybody. I'm Alexy Khrabrov, the organizer of SF Text, and here we're on location on Group 1. We have a meetup about ontologies. And here with us, we have Jeff Lerman, staff ontology engineer at QIAGEN, who works on biological knowledge organization. And I'm first curious, can you tell us a little bit what is the knowledge domain where you're building these ontologies?
Okay, so the QIAGEN ontology, which formerly I should say the Ingenuity ontology, covers biology broadly. It's specifically for use in analyzing genomic data, clinical and research data, as well as more broadly molecular biology-related data. So, and the original impetus for setting something like this up was probably now 15 years ago, as the volume of data started to get really large. People started to be able to do experiments in parallel, where they could acquire a large amount of data in a short amount of time very easily. And the challenge then becomes analysis. And so obviously we're still in that space today where we have a lot of data and analysis is the bottleneck. The sources of the data are different and the volume of the data are different, but that's why we do what we do. So
is this ontology mainly for humans? So is it basically organizing all this knowledge in a human-readable form? Humans as opposed to computers, right? Because you can use ontologies in different ways.
Sure. So the ontology is rarely used directly. We don't make the ontology available. We don't currently have any business models where we're making the ontology directly available to customers. We do have internally ways to visualize what we have, and we have our query language and our manipulation language. But the ontology really serves as the underpinning to other application software that we sell. And so we need it to be computer readable, certainly, computer usable. But at the same time, it's serving, it's not very far removed from different applications where it has to be human readable.
Okay. And so the end user is still a human. It's not as, like it's not like you use this ontology as a way to automatically cluster things necessarily. Like you have a human asking queries, right, and receiving data back. That's right.
Sort of, yes. I mean, it's interesting. The ontology sort of kind of sits at the core, or the hub of what we do, because on the one side, we're in the business of curating data from disparate sources, from databases that may have a different organizational structure than we've got, which are, but they still have an organizational structure, to fully sort of open-ended text from the literature. And so we do need the ontology to help the people who are importing that data to assist them in the process of classification and organization, right? So the ontology is both the system by which we organize data, and it informs the tools that we use to allow us to have that organized data and acquire that data. On the other side, of course, we want to expose that data in various forms and various circumstances through our application software to users. And so, of course, we have human users at some point, right?
Yes.
But the ontology is not accessed directly even by the applications. We take its organizational structure or output, we export that in some format that is then in turn used by the application. So there's some layers in between, a few layers in between the end users and the ontology itself, but it still very strongly determines what our applications can do.
Got it. So there is a lot of data in the people call bioinformatics or genomics, and we have actually several startups in SF Scala, which I also run, and I was amazed by looking at genomics databases, how much text is there, how much artifacts, so genomic sequences themselves, various papers talking about them, various codes, right? Like this paper. So, and I used to work at Protein Data Bank a long time ago, and they have their own, and I looked at Medline and so forth, and I was really amazed by the sheer volume of all this data, and so it seems that everybody has their own databases. There are European databases, there are US databases, there are all kinds of things. So, are these ontologies that you're talking about, are they unifying all of these data sources? For instance, sequences themselves and papers about sequences. Can you place both things on the same ontology?
Sure. So we certainly define our limits, and so that's one thing actually that we don't do in the ontology itself is to deal with sequence data. We do deal with variant data quite a lot, and so that's becoming of more and more import as it's become cheaper and cheaper to sequence, DNA and even sequence whole genomes, which is sort of just ridiculous that we're at the point where we can do that.
Yes.
But even a single genome results in an enormous amount of data, even after it's consolidated, and the raw data, much more so. So what's of interest is to be able to look at the differences, the variants, the genetic variants, and to be able to learn something from the presence or absence of different variants.
Yes.
So we don't process whole sequence data. We don't, and we certainly don't store whole papers. But we extract, I would say, useful information, what we consider to be useful information, statements, more than, so qualitative more than quantitative data, statements and relationships from all these sources. So from the literature, certainly, and there are parts of the literature that we focus on very intently. And then there are, for example, databases that focus on genetic variants, and we'll import those. And so we do have a task of unifying a variety of different data sources. So as you mentioned, there are American and European databases for genes and other genetic information. I don't know about a competitor to the PDB, to the Protein Data Bank.
I think that's fortunately stay centralized. I mean, based on my knowledge from 10 years ago.
Right, and it's been a while. So I also used to be a protein structural biologist, but I also haven't thought too much about the PDB for a while now.
Yes.
But anyway, there are obviously different databases covering some of the same information. They complement each other to some extent, and we do our best to unify information from those databases. We want, we can't stand alone. People coming to us with their data are speaking a certain language, right? They're using certain identifiers to refer to concepts. We need to be able to map those identifiers to those same concepts. So we need to be able to take the refseq, for example, for one of the American database identifiers, those IDs, and we need to understand those. But ditto for the European ones, and that's just for genes and for genetic sequences. There's a variety of other things like that.
Interesting. So let me kind of throw some idea on the table, which I discussed recently with several folks in the space. So we have several startups doing genomics, and also AmpLab at Berkeley is using Spark to help basically with sequencing, and essentially there are several communities, both industrial and academic, which unite to fight cancer through this kind of open genomic research, and there is a global alliance of several forces. And so, being a software engineer myself, I'm always thinking that open source approach is superior because you can put something on GitHub and kind of you have a good README file and a good example and test. Then you will have a lot of developers who will jump on it. So we had these conversations where we can, we're thinking, how can we package this knowledge, kind of genomics for computer scientists, and what kind of resources we need to enable open source collaboration, right? So we need some kind of data which is referenceable in some common understood format, and we also need to explain the problems in genomics to developers, but because have a lot of smart developers in the space, they can probably do a lot of advances. So I'm wondering, so you're organizing all this knowledge, right? Are there any insights you can share? Are there any ways for the community to leverage this information and kind of quickly understand or point people to the right pieces, right? So is this something which software engineer can do as a hobby in their spare time, or is this something only a professional researcher can do? What is your thinking about this? So
the idea here is how much of what we learn or what we organize can be made available so that in a public domain. In the public domain, or if I understand you guys have a business model and we make these products available, but how much of this can be built together by open source community? For instance, looking at the open available data, is this something which community needs to do? Is this other ways for community to organize this knowledge and make it available to computer scientists, kind of to quickly educate themselves? Well, I think there's opportunities there. And frankly, I don't think that that's something that we take advantage of or we really promote right now, because as you pointed out, and we have this in common with a lot of people, I think, we're a private company, and the primary, all primary energies are devoted towards making things that we can sell, essentially. On the other hand, we benefit from the existence of public databases of genetic data, and among others, I mentioned the genetics, that's a big focus lately, but there are certainly other public databases that we use. We do a couple of things. So we take advantage of those databases, but then we also put a lot of energy into curating, like I said, unstructured knowledge, and essentially exposing the structure, right? Or exposing, putting a structure around the meanings. So that latter stuff is, I would say, probably going to continue to be pretty proprietary, because that labor-intensive kind of work that just requires a lot of money, that's where the sort of private domain probably has an advantage over the public domain. We need a large number of very highly trained experts doing this stuff, and it's just expensive. But for the public databases that we use, they're more useful to us if they're higher quality. And so we regularly provide feedback to these databases, and they get to know us because we are so focused on quality and testing and integration. We notice issues that they frequently don't have the resources to notice. And so we do provide feedback in that way. And that sort of thing, if there were a forum for it, might be even more valuable. If we could say, hey, we have some suggestions as to how data could be, and we're happy to share them with the world because everyone benefits, right? We have some suggestions as to what people should be paying attention to when they're developing databases, when they're organizing data, when they're collating data. And here are some techniques that people could use to help that along and to make that feasible. So I think that sort of interaction, I think there's room for that sort of thing.
Makes sense. So, but I'm also curious, so you said you're a biologist, right? So what brought you from biology to basically knowledge organization, which is essentially, a computer scientist kind of domain?
It is. I mean, we're in an interesting space. In my group, we certainly are doing data science, as it were, and we don't use that name, but people do. We are a mix of people with a strong computer science background and people with a strong sciences background. I would say most people in the group are PhD level scientists, either in chemistry or biology. And with varying levels of exposure to the clinical side, but probably more on the research side. We're a group of people who are interested in maybe stepping back from the what you might call in the business world the individual contributor level when it comes to scientific knowledge, and more sort of aware and interested in the idea that, hey, there's all this knowledge out there, but it's not that useful if it's not accessible. And so much of it is inaccessible, either because it's not well organized to begin with, it's not well structured to begin with, or because it's just not integrated into a unified system, or any kind of unified system. And so there's knowledge that can be exposed without doing anything in the lab, just by sort of putting the pieces together that are already out there, if you can reveal those pieces and get them into one system. So that's intriguing to me. I mean, I came from a place where I was a graduate student and then a postdoc, like we said, in molecular biology, specifically in protein structure, and I did sort of biophysics, biochemistry work.
So you did the lab?
I was in the lab. I've also, but for a long, long time, I've been interested in computers and sort of playing with them, and so that's always been kind of a bent of mine. And at some point, the idea of using computers as a tool to help organize knowledge and make it more accessible and sort of do great things with it became more appealing maybe than the toiling at the lab bench. And so I kind of turned that corner. And so I haven't, it's still important to me to stay connected to the sciences and to the science that I was doing, and I am. In the, where we are, we're still thinking very much about the scientific aspect of things. Otherwise, there's no usefulness to it.
Right, because it's not abstract knowledge. Like you need to understand the domain.
We need to have really good domain knowledge, and we need to understand what we're doing, or else, and that's what gives us, some advantage. Is that on the one hand we understand how to sort of reduce data and how to reduce knowledge and model it in a useful way that will allow us to do inference and calculation. On the other hand, we understand the knowledge itself in the bits and pieces, and so that hopefully helps us not to make silly mistakes. And also to sort of recognize the opportunities.
So I'm kind of come back to this, open source community to fight cancer, because I was really, struck by how much opportunity is there and how little is of this, centralized organization. There is a lot of organizations trying to unify this data, but there is so much. Like from a computer scientist point of view, it seems extremely fragmented. It also seems to me that there is a lot of great sciences people, but they're not necessarily Google-level computer scientists. So because they devote the efforts into discovering the primary knowledge, and there is not enough folks like you who piece it together yet, right? And so I'm wondering, is it even feasible? Is it possible for a computer scientist like me, who does not have a formal molecular biology training, but is curious and kind of can understand almost everything if you read it many times, presumably, can we present the problems of fighting cancer in digestible pieces? Can we decompose the problem, and can we also take all this knowledge which I'm mapping and present to computer scientists in digestible pieces and kind of map a little path to them, so somebody over a course of time, a community can kind of make different efforts and kind of together write a lot of good code to eventually defeat cancer through community crowdsourced programming. Is it a possible activity?
Right. So I mean, I think when we use terms like defeat cancer, we kind of we're at a very high level, and sometimes that can, but there are lots of
find drugs for cancer or understand sorting,
absolutely
right.
I mean, so one of the things people are really interested in doing now is finding ways to leverage genomic data, genetic data, to determine what the most likely good treatments are for individual patients.
Yes.
Right. So we talk about personalized medicine. That's a lot of what people are talking about.
Yes.
So in order to do that, we basically want to be able to take advantage of everything that's come before. Has this variant been seen before? If it hasn't been seen before, can we infer things about it based on where it is or other things that we know? So, I mean, there's a few things that would help. One, and this is an ongoing challenge. It's a moving target. Over time, we realize, and when I say we, not the company, but the community realizes that there might be additional pieces of information about a given observation that are important for us to be able to take full advantage of it. But of course, if that happens in some year, the years before that, when people were collecting all that data, might be missing those pieces. So there is a certain, I think it would be hard to make a single unified sort of data format, even if you, which would be great, right? I mean, so if we had a public database of all of the relevant observations, that would be a huge step in the right direction. But of course, there's a challenge in creating such a thing because we don't actually know all of the details.
What are the fields?
Kinds of detail? What are the fields? We don't know the kinds of details that we want to capture, and that's probably going to change over time. So you need a system that allows for that flexibility, and you need approaches that are robust to those kinds of variations. So like, all right, so some data has some detail and some doesn't, but we still need to be able to do something with it.
Yes.
So there's those kinds of things. I think that it's interesting because in a group like ours, we have this overlap of expertise between the specific genomic and biological domain knowledge and an understanding of data reduction and data organization. But we're not world-class experts on either side, right? So it would certainly be interesting for there to be communication between groups like ours that are, and there are other groups that are developing biological ontologies or trying to do things like this, and people who are really like 100% data scientists, maybe thinking about some of these problems in a more focused way, and sort of have that conversation because yes, I think that there probably are pieces that we could break off of these problems. And have the community sort of turning on them. And I think that happens to some extent, but there could certainly be more.
Yeah, so I was really motivated by observing all these groups working towards the same goal, but maybe as software developers, we can actually facilitate this through open source. And it actually strikes me that the ontologies are working on is probably a very good way to bring this knowledge together, right? So we probably need good public ontologies as well, because this is something where you're hanging all these pieces of knowledge onto, right? So this is kind of a backbone, and so this is something which computer scientists understand, right? So if we have a good public ontology, which we all can agree on, that probably will move this a long way. So now I'm really interested in how to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that there are attempts at that out there. One of the sort of fundamental challenges, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later as well, of building a good ontology is that it turns out to be fairly labor intensive. And you can certainly, with software, develop techniques to facilitate maintaining quality, and especially as you increase the domain and increase the coverage. But what we find are the ontologies that are public just don't have that amount of attention being, or resources being devoted to them, either to sort of maintain the quality, or even to test the quality, right? And so at least if we can get to the testing part, we can say, okay, here's some good techniques for testing.
Yes.
Then there could be, we would know. First of all, we'd have a metric of the quality, right? We would know what the quality was in any given perspective. And people would have things to work on. If they wanted to come and contribute to a project like that, and it was like, well, here are areas that we know the tests fail in the following ways. So I think that would be a huge step in the right direction.
I think that sounds like something which software engineers can really relate to through test-driven development. Like you first start by writing tests, what is your metric of quality, right? And then you start kind of populating and measuring. So that strikes me as something which we, as a community, can probably try. But thank you very much, Jeff. It's really interesting, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you.
Thanks.